Alright you guys, the first album review of 2024, and today we are gonna review the Beach Boys' Sunflower, released at the end of August 1970. And well, I've already talked a lot about this album on this channel a few years back when they released the ultimate compilation Feel Flows, including pretty much all the outtakes as well, and a lot of the studio stuff, background vocals, separated instrumental tracks, and so on. I did full reviews of that, though I did mention in that one that I'm not gonna dive into the actual Sunflower album that much, because I'm gonna do one day a full review of it in a separate video. So now here's that day, and now I'm doing that a few years later. Well, before I dive into the artwork and the song selection, let's do the traditional thing and talk about the background a little bit. The late 60s was a very difficult time for the Beach Boys, and there was multiple reasons for that. First of all, their record contract with Capitol was ending in '69. Though Capitol was semi-interested in renewing that contract, the group really wasn't. They failed to deliver this album by the deadline that they gave them, and there was all kinds of things. They weren't happy with the Capitol marketing after basically since Pet Sounds, because the image of the group, the music of the group had changed, but Capitol was still marketing them basically for the past 5 years, marketing them as the #1 surf group of the United States, and that was just so far out of the actual image and the music that they were putting out. So and that really affected their sales and their image very harmfully. Anyway, in '69 actually the Beach Boys sued Capitol for royalties and stuff. It was really just a bad situation for everybody. And what ended up happening was that as their record contract ended, Capitol pulled off their whole catalog. So they sort of cut off their income from royalties because all their Capitol albums went extinct. You couldn't buy them anymore anyway. Mary ended up selling the Sea of Tunes, basically the publishing company for their basically all their biggest hits, that music. And I'm not really sure what that legally meant and what sort of... I know it was a huge misfire and ended up costing them, especially Brian, a lot, but I'm not really sure how that legally that works, that publishing thing, rights, because obviously they always own, if you write a song, you own it, you're always the writer, but I'm not really a lawyer, so I don't really know about that stuff. But anyway, that ended up happening the same time, and their previous albums were flop one after another. 2020, which was their last album, studio album on Capitol, ended up selling a little bit better than Friends and Wild Honey, but nonetheless it was a failure. Though I really love that album. I think it's a great album filled with amazing songs. It's a hodgepodge, but I don't really care. It's still a great listen. Between that one and this one, Brian wrote with Murray Breakaway, released that one, and they hoped that would be the next big hit single for them. That's a great song, but it failed. Just, once again, same thing, it didn't get any airplay, and it was a huge bummer. And even though all these things were happening simultaneously, Charles Manson murders and that trial, everything was just going on at the same time. The Beach Boys crowds, they didn't get even, like, if they got 200 audience members to a concert, that was like a good thing in the States. In Europe they were still hot stuff, but not in the States. They were able finally to get a new record contract in 1970 with Reprise Records, which is owned by Warner, and Warner really believed in them. And the Beach Boys really wanted to prove themselves, really write great songs and deliver a great album. So what ended up happening, they actually, for a time period of 1 year or so, they wrote and recorded about 50 tracks. And out of those tracks, they ended up doing multiple different like album offerings for the record company, and this was then I think the third or fourth or fifth, I'm not really sure, the version of Sunflower that eventually got released. So anyway, they worked so hard for it and really were firing with all cylinders and wanted to prove themselves. They were really hungry, and really they knew that it was this or nothing. Like this really had to succeed. They released this end of August 1970. The first single was Add Some Music to Your Day, and they ended up releasing quite a few singles from this album in the next year or two time period. And Add Some Music to Your Day was, I think it peaked like 64 or something like that, and then it dropped completely. And the album itself peaked 151. That was the lowest charting studio album by them by that time. It was a huge disappointment and basically just a farce, a catastrophe, really. And all the rest of the singles failed to chart completely, I believe. It did a little bit better in the UK and Europe in general, but nonetheless it was a huge failure, the biggest catastrophe that really could have happened. And retrospectively, it's so sad because the album itself is fucking amazing. It's phenomenal. It's not an overstatement to say that it might actually be as good as Pet Sounds, in my opinion at least. It is really up there. You are looking at, in my opinion, one of the reasons why this album flopped. I know the times were really not fancy with the Beach Boys, late 60s, early 70s, so probably anything that they would have put out with their name on it wouldn't have sold. It was basically the similar situation that the Bee Gees had in the late 70s after the disco apocalypse thing, you know, the 80s too, continuing to the 80s, when the Bee Gees were doing different things and nobody was, you know, going to play them or listen to them just because of their name, but then they actually ended up writing a lot of songs or giving a lot of their great songs to other artists, and then they became #1 singles. It was crazy. But anyway, like the Beach Boys were kind of having the similar time during this time. Anything that they put out in the late 60s and early 70s until Surf's Up, the next album, was just deemed to fail because the general listeners, music buying public, they just did not like the name of the Beach Boys. They didn't want to hear it. They were deemed uncool, unhip, and out of the time, out of touch, and you know, that was it. So you can't really blame them because it wasn't their fault. But still, looking at this album cover, even though I've learned to love it as a fan, I cannot really understand what they were really going at with this, because while it's a cool family picture, I love it. The photograph was taken by Ricky Martin at Dean Martin's backyard. It's a cool picture with the kids, and I really love it myself. But overall, it's just so unappealing and uncommercial as you just can get. And it doesn't look artistic at all. It looks actually very corny, very cheesy. And if you flip it, it doesn't really get any better. It's simple. I dig it. I actually like this more. But it's just so unappealing. I just cannot imagine a record buying guy going to a record store and seeing this there in the year of 1970 and going like, hey, new album by the Beach Boys, I'm gonna get this. It's just kind of so out of touch, and it just doesn't look appealing at all. And if you actually open up this gatefold, this is a re-release from probably like 2011 or 12 or something like that, by Capitol with the Brother label. So it's actually pretty cool. I might actually, let's show you the record because this is kind of interesting. You know, it has that Capitol and the Brother label. It sounds great, this version. But yeah, it's a gatefold. That one is actually 1980 repress. Can't remember which country, probably from Europe. It isn't gatefold. This is the original gatefold type. I remember actually, let's tell a little story. When I bought this album, I don't know, 13 years ago or something like that, 12 years ago, I don't think I had listened to the whole thing prior to actually going to this one record store and finding this LP, this one over here, and it was wrapped, and I had heard a lot of it, and I had heard some of the songs, but then I got this album home, and I remember opening this up. This was one of the first LPs that I bought by the Beach Boys, most definitely. And I looked at these images and I was like, oh my god, what did I do? Did I really spend 30 euros for this? I felt so, I don't know, like this just doesn't really sell me sell me the music, and it looks so cheesy, and still up to this day I do not like these images at all. I just don't think they really represent the guys at all. Even Dennis looks uncool, which is weird to me. This one I do like, the image of Brian's house. That's really the only one. Car looks semi-cool, but otherwise it's like, what the heck? Come on, like it's just so... I can dig it in an ironic way, kind of, I don't know, but I think that's sort of one of the reasons why it's sold so poorly. Just the marketing and the graphic design and the artwork in general, just so unappealing. Even if you just take this sunflower, which I think is really cool, and I really dig this label, this logo thing, this thing over here, I think it would have been much more interesting if the album cover would be this sort of dark garden, ground, forest thing, kind of like Smiley Smile album cover, this sort of illustration with dark green colors, and I don't know, maybe some ugly worms over here or something. And then at the center there would be this sunflower, and then there would be like a sun ray or something, light beam going for it, and then you'd have the Beach Boys sunflower logo at the top or bottom. I think that would have been really groovy sort of illustration. It would have been much more artistic and appealing, something like that. I don't know, but that's just a random idea. But anyway, let's dive into the song selection itself. Let's actually I have some notes this time because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. So sorry if it's gonna be a bit rambly. The A-side starts off with Slip On Through, which is an amazing opener, though a bit strange one. I think much more usual way to open up an album, because it's not a Brian song, it's Dennis Wilson's tune, would have been to flip This Whole World and Slip On Through, because This Whole World is a much more traditional Beach Boys rocker and a sort of album opener. So, you know, that, I don't know, but anyway, Slip On Through works really fine because it's a bit unusual. So right from the get-go, you kind of get this feeling that you're gonna hear something different from this album. So I love that. But it would have worked either way. Well, Slip On Through, it has this lush production, great soulful vocals by Dennis, and the background vocals are super psychedelic. And I think that's, even though Slip On Through isn't really a great representation of a lot of the tracks, especially on the side B, because there's only like 3 or 4 rockers really on this album, but those background vocals are really something different on the whole album. They are, even on this kind of more traditional blues rocker type of tracks, mainly by Dennis here, you get those psychedelic weird background vocals which are very strong and very prominent, but just somehow kind of off-putting, weird. They just are kind of strange, and I really love that. Drums on this track, and I could say this for pretty much each of these tracks, the drums on Sunflower are produced really well and performed really well. You got a lot of session musicians on this album, but the Beach Boys play 2 basically on pretty much each track. So the Beach Boys are very prominent, Dennis and Carl especially, and Brian, but you got dozens and dozens of session musicians as well. Hal Blaine is there, but I cannot really remember who plays on which track, because it's just an endless list of session musicians on this album. But that's just one of the sort of things why I think this album is sort of an ultimate album by them, because it's a true group effort in each way, right from the songwriting. Each guys are sort of writing songs with different combinations together, and also performing and recording the songs together, and sort of just pulling from each source. Previously they would do an album, Brian would record with the Wrecking Crew, Pet Sounds for example, then maybe add Carl and Dennis for a track or two, or they would go the completely different way and do the whole album just by themselves, and so on, you know. But with this album, everything is sort of just coming together in a really, really special way. You got the touring members playing on some tracks, you got the session guys on some tracks adding something with the instrumentations and backing tracks that the guys have already done themselves. And you know, it's just a tight combination of adding and, you know, using all the assets that they had gathered and learned by that time. And Stephen Desper was the engineer of this album, plays also some Moog synthesizer here and there. He was just phenomenal, and you know, this album sounds freaking great. But anyway, This Whole World, great rocker, 2-minute song, a crazy composition. You'd never think about it really if you just listen to the track and go on with your life, that there's really much special about it if you haven't ever picked up an instrument, or you know, don't have that sort of musical ear in that sense. But if you check out the chords for this song, it's freaking crazy. It's really hard to name another song that really comes close to the complexity of This Whole World. Even though lyrically it's very simple, it's probably the most positive and up-tempo song Brian ever wrote, and probably most positive thing the Beach Boys ever wrote, because it doesn't have really anything creepy, sad, melancholic, nothing. Because usually even with those happiest songs that they did, there's some sort of sublime creepiness in the, not necessarily always sometimes in the lyrics, but a lot of times there's some sort of minor chords or lines that sort of evoke a sad feeling, even though if the song in general is positive. Well, This Whole World is just this blissful, positive song. I love it. It's a fan favorite. Everybody loves it. Carl's maybe best vocals ever. And there's like 30 chords in it. The chord changes on pretty much each word, each line. It just goes, and there's like 4 modulations in it. It's crazy. And one thing that I do not like about it is there's great sort of country-esque guitars there throughout the whole tracks, but you can barely hear them because they're mixed so low. So I wish just that they were kind of pumped up a little bit, because there's some great guitar work on this song. But yeah, it's a great freaking song. Let's move on. Third track, Add Some Music to Your Day. A classic Beach Boys track, often considered there's a reason why it was chosen for the first single from this album, because it sort of describes everything that the Beach Boys is about in a really great way, simple way. I love the way each member gets their own lead vocal line in the verses, and a lot of people say that, well, Dennis isn't there, but he is. He doesn't sing those, you know, those verse lines, but he does sing multiple times very audibly the add some music part before the chorus, I guess. But you know, like I think he sings it like 4 times, and it's right there in between like a lead vocal and a background vocal, because it's separated from the background vocals very prominently. But if you can, you know, spot that, he's very audible there, and I love that part. That's sort of the hook of the song. So anyway, he is there. Anyway, like, yeah, somebody might say that the lyrics are a bit naive and silly, but I think it's very honest, and I really feel that way too. I think music is so important to us living things. It's just something, and it's really greatly, I feel, captured in the line, music is in my soul. It's just like, it's such a simple thing, something that you take for granted, and you don't really usually stop to think about it. Music is everywhere, and when you watch a great movie, what's the thing that usually, you know, makes you teary-eyed or touches you the most? makes you excited, scared. It's usually the soundtrack, the score. When you go to a wedding, what's the thing that gets you like pumped up? It's the music. It's always the music. So everything always comes back to it, and this song really brings it all together. I really love the lyrics, and I really love the way they performed this song on the 50th anniversary tour, having kind of gathered around Brian's piano, and Brian did most of the singing, but it was just a beautiful way to perform it and sort of honor the years together and all that. So it was a really touching moment. Got to Know the Woman is a very different type of a track for the album. A little bit similar to Slip On Through because it's a Dennis Wilson track once again, but it's much more simpler. It's basically just a blues rocker, sort of pub rock in the song. Pretty simple, easygoing, has a groovy beat, which just goes throughout the song. And for a lot of people, this track is the weakest track of the album, but personally really love it. I remember listening to the album the first time, that was probably one of my least favorites, and it kind of stood out. But the more I've listened to the album, the more I just dig it. I think it's a great rocker, and to me it sounds very similar to early 80s Springsteen stuff. I could really imagine Springsteen doing that live in the River period. It just has a similar vibe to me, and it also has those great background vocals, very psychedelic parts sometimes, and Mike's really great with the bass vocals on this one. Deirdre is the second to last track on side A, first track on the album by Bruce Johnston, and Deirdre is a fan favorite. It's not Bruce Johnston himself was retrospectively disappointed for recording the track for this album, and I really don't know why. I always loved it. I think it's a beautiful, it's a soft rock tune, even though it's very, very mellow, but overall it is an up-tempo soft rock song. Great drums, and I love Mike's "lots of people miss" part. It's just, I don't know, the backgrounds, everything, it is just so great. And Bruce is singing so perfectly here. His voice it's very different from the rest of the guys, and he can really camouflage it to sound like more like the other guys. But here he's just singing it like Bruce sings, and I really dig it. Great song. It's About Time ends side A. The track was mostly done by Dennis and Carl, and then Al added some lyrics, and I think there was a fourth songwriter on it too. I'm not really sure, but it's a pretty simple rocker, probably one of the hardest rocking things the Beach Boys ever recorded. The bongos are great, the drums are great, Carl's lead vocals, just classic stuff. He's very soulful on it. Though I only miss that, and I wish that Dennis would have sung that "I'm singing from my heart" or whatever the part is. I think it would have been cool if Dennis had sung that part. But the bass line it's very simple, but it's very effective. It's basically just the same thing. Dun, 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 dun. It's very simple, but it's very groovy. And the production on it maybe is a tad. I think it could have been more edgier, but then again, it probably wouldn't have fit this album so much. So there's that. But it's a little bit out of place on this album because it's so hard rocking. But the lyrics are great, and the production is done in a way that it fits the album. Even though I think the song itself would benefit a little bit more like a bare bones, edgier production. But the guitar solo, the riff, everything, how it just grows and grows until the end. It's just amazing, and the live versions of these songs are great as well. Let's then flip the record and continue with side B. And the first song, "Tears in the Morning" by Bruce Johnston, the second song by Bruce on this album. And right from the get-go, you get those great drums. Tears in the Morning. I love this song. It reminds me a lot of Paul McCartney's sort of melodramatic productions, and I think Bruce even at some parts sings kind of like Paul. So there's a sort of a little bit of that going on, and it's very orchestral. I really like the lyrics, and I like the way Bruce sings it. Bruce had this way of singing, kind of camouflage his voice to sound a bit more like the other guys, because his sound is very different, it's very unique, and it usually is very easily recognizable from the stack of vocals. But I think here he's just singing like Bruce, and it's great. I really appreciate his voice, and I wrote in my notes that accordion is great, but I actually had to Google if that is an accordion or not, because it sounds a little bit different. And I found out that it's actually a concertina. So I have no idea what instrument that is, but it is apparently an instrument kind of like accordion, but a little bit smaller. And it's played here by Carl Fortina. And anyway, it's a beautifully played instrument, and that part I really love. That it really makes the song. And there's this sort of despair in that way Bruce sings the lyrics, and the story too. It's in the paper too, so I really like that. Something very similar to some of the stuff that Brian used to write. And yeah, the tag is so beautiful when it kind of just slows down, and you get a reverb once again, and it just kind of goes on forever until it fades out. And then we go to the next song. You hear those opening notes of All I Wanna Do. I have no idea what instruments play those opening notes. It sounds to me like an organ, but I checked that there isn't supposed to be an organ on the track, so I have no idea what instrument that plays. But do 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 do, then you get the guitar, do 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 do, and then the drums. Do 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 do. It's so great. It really reminds me of, I don't know, like Chromatics or Julie Cruz or something, like, you know, the dream pop stuff. It's really great. Mike's lead vocals, the sound of his voice, how he's singing. This is the only song that you get a full Mike lead vocal in the whole song, you know, without really anybody else doing lead. And Mike doesn't do a single traditional Mike Love lead vocal on the whole album, which is crazy. But sometimes people say about Mike, he wasn't a great singer, he was a lousy singer. And it's like, come on, have you heard of Sunflower? Have you heard of All I Wanna Do? Have you heard of Friends? Pet Sounds? Come on, how can you say that? Whatever, you know. But anyway, he's so soulful here, and I love that. Well, the most complex thing about this song is the background vocals. They are crazy. They are going all over the place, and they are not just singing ooh, you know, stuff, but they are actually singing different lines, you know, complete different words, things. Like, it's crazy. If you listen to that on headphones and pump up the volume, it's like a different soundscape. It's so weird, and usually this sort of production is so hard to pull it off. I have no idea how they were able to succeed in doing this, because usually it would turn into just this complete mess, and it would be horrible to listen to it, especially with that fuzz guitar, which is audible throughout the track, most audibly during the sort of the chorus part. But I love that fuzz guitar. It's so heavy and it is so out of place. It shouldn't work, but somehow it just does. Now, you don't know who plays it. Is that Carl or somebody else? But it is so great. It's my favorite part of the song. It sounds like thunder. It's so great. I loved the way when Mike's group played it live. Scott Totten did that guitar part even heavier, so it was really cool. But yeah, I remember hearing this song the first time, and I was just blown away. It's a great track. And then it's followed with Forever, another big one. What can I really say about it that hasn't been said? It's Dennis's signature song. A lot of people consider it his best. I don't personally know about that, but lyrically it's very simple. A lot of times these sort of lyrics fall into a sort of corny, cheesy category, and it's hard to pull off because it's a straightforward I love you type of a song. So that sort of lyrics are just, they are very hard to pull off, and this song is not easy to sing because of that. because you really need to feel that emotion and then, you know, perform it, deliver it really hard. Yeah, so anyway, another album by the Beach Boys from 1992 actually proves that point very well. But anyway, Dennis here sings so soulfully, and the production supports the composition so well, and you get that classic, it's rare but classic, legendary Brian and Dennis sort of interplay with voices, and I love that. Brian used to do that even in the early recordings with Dennis coming in here and there, and then he kind of did that again with some of the tracks on Today and Pet Sounds, and that was a little bit different thing. But here it's once again sort of a new thing. They are singing, the way Brian's coming in with that beautiful background sound, it's just so amazing. And then they did it again with 15 Big Ones and Love You, and that's another thing then again. But there's just something so special about Dennis and Brian singing together, and I wish they'd done that more, because there really is only a handful of tunes where you can audibly really hear just them, or maybe Carl with them, you know. It's just obviously they are singing together in a lot of songs, but in the way that you can hear here, or I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, or I Bet He's Nice, or Mona, you know, that sort of songs. I'm talking about that sort of thing. There's just something really special about that, and I love that. And you know, Forever, just a great song. Perfect track. What else can you really say about it? So soulful, mellow, and you never get tired of it. And these two great tracks are then followed with another Brian Wilson composition, Our Sweet Love, which is sung here by Carl, and Carl kind of finished the track. Brian, it was an idea that Brian had, but he didn't finish it, but he just kind of left it for the rest of the group to finish, and Carl kind of did most of the heavy lifting for it. And Our Sweet Love, I feel, is the most underrated track on the whole album. It's not talked about that much, and I can understand why it's sort of, because it's in the shadow of two great tracks. It's a tough place to follow forever, but it's kind of similar. It has that mellow sound, and once again a love theme, but it has a little bit of different angle, and I really like the way it reflects summer and winter, and especially that second verse with that winter landscape. It's really my sort of a thing, as I've talked about previously with Time to Get Alone and stuff. I can just really dig that. I can really feel that. I look from the window right now, all I can see is snow and, you know, ice. There's a frozen lake, there's trees are covered with snow. So that's sort of the thing that really the cabin light and the warmth of the fire, that sort of thing. I really love that atmosphere. It feels very personal to me, because it's sort of my life in a way. So, you know, my weird thing. But that string arrangement on it, it's very unusual. This album doesn't use that much strings. There's strings on this one, and the Bruises tracks, but I think that's pretty much it. So anyway, it's mellow, different sort of a production, and very mellow track. But there's great sort of guitar solo by Carl Wilson on it, which I really love. Check that out. Then we get At My Window, which is a Brian Wilson, Al Jardine song, sang by Bruce Johnston, and Brian does some pretty adorable French here. He has that spoken French part in the middle. It's pretty crazy. And this track is just perfect psychedelic pop. I love it. It started off as a sort of a folksy thing. Al presented it to Brian, that, hey, I got this sort of folk thing about the birds or whatever. And then Brian turned it into this sort of, it's pretty complex, kind of. It has some weird chords, and that whole thing, it just has this quality, this sort of very psychedelic weird. It is sort of funny, but not really. It has some creepy things. I think there's like this creepy chord. I had to write it down. It's that from their eyes, and then there's the do 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 do. It goes like into a minor chord, and it's a very kind of creepy effect that it has. And then it goes back to major chords, I believe, for the tag, and the tag is so majestic. It's so beautiful, but you know, it just has that sort of Brian Wilson magic all over it. I really love it, and it's an underrated track too. But I feel it's maybe talked about a little bit more than Our Sweet Love. I don't know, but always loved it. It's very similar to Friends material and I Went to Sleep from 2020. So if you dig those albums and you know that sort of vibe, this is it. This is a, you know, true follow-up for that. And then the album ends off with Cool Cool Water, which is sort of a leftover from Smile once again. It's easy to just deem it as a sort of novelty thing, like what, water, whatever, you know, cool water, okay, it's just whatever. But if you actually think about it, water is everything, water is life. And this track is, if you just think about the lyrics, it's a hymn for water and life. And to me, it's so beautiful. It really goes to the core of everything. And it just does it in a so simple, direct way. And I love it. I really think it's so ethereal. I don't know, otherworldly, whatever you can use all kinds of crazy words about it, but I think it's just so sublime and so beautiful. And it is very psychedelic, and the production on it is great. It has Moog synthesizers all over it. I love that drip thing. I believe Brian plays that part, that dip, 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 dip thing. It's so cool. And it goes all over the place. There are multiple segments to it. I think it's over 5 minutes long, and the segments represent movement of water, basically, to me at least. There's this sort of underwater thing, and you know, like a stream going, and it's just amazing. And that end part with that classic Mike and Brian interplay is so cool. I just wish it could go on for like 5 minutes and, you know, be endless. I love that. And I love that live version from around this time with Mike. I think he's having his coat over here and he's like, oh, he's so cool. I love that. But it was very ballsy for them to actually release this as a single as well, though it didn't chart at all. But to me, it's a perfect song, pretty much as good as anything they ever recorded. It's just so sublime and so, I don't know, it's just everything. And it sort of culminates everything that the Beach Boys is about. It just encapsulates everything. I don't know, you can use all kinds of fancy words with it, but I don't know, it's just a perfect song. But there it was. Sunflower by the Beach Boys. What do you think about it? If I compare it to some of the other albums that I maybe put ahead of it in my favorite list, this still is much more fun to listen to than, let's say, Pet Sounds. Because I guess this is just the kind of album that is fun to listen to on any day. It's not syrupy. It's not like too much fun, but it's not sad either. It's not too melancholic. There's some sadness to it. It's not dark. It's not depressing. It's not too poppy. All the artistry and the complexity of the songs and the greatness of the vocal performances, it's all up there in front of your eyes and ears to hear and witness. So it's not too easygoing or too much fun, you know, too simple, but it is simple enough to enjoy on any given day. You know, it's kind of hard to describe what makes it so great, but I guess that's probably the gist of it. It's like comparing it to some other super artistic things, like what, for example, Smile by the Beach Boys or Pet Sounds. It's like, yeah, those are great albums, but this is a great album to listen to any day, whether you're walking outdoors, indoors, at work, driving, whatever. It's always just great. There's some, like I mentioned, there's some sadness to it, some melancholic to it too, It's very heartfelt, heartwarming, but it's not heartbreaking, you know. But you know, it's just a cool album. I just wish that it would have been a bigger hit around its release, because it's so sad that it flopped so hard, because it is, you could argue it's a masterpiece. It's a great freaking album. So it's that's just a sad thing, because they really pulled it off. Really were firing with all cylinders, and it shows. But anyway, what do you think about it? Thanks for watching. See you again on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.